Paul?
It's interesting because I come to this from a different perspective, which is how marketers behave. And I guess the interesting thing, there's three things that have come out of listening to this, and I'm quite new to the consumer advocacy area as well. There is already a huge amount of evidence out there. Marketers and psychologists have been using that evidence for 40 years to get people to behave the way they would like them to behave in general. Okay, so I'm not suggesting that marketers have this magical power to make people behave the way they want them to, but there is plenty of evidence, and until I turned against the evils and tried to shine the light on it, this is what marketers do. They exploit vulnerabilities. I just recently read a paper which was targeting the poverty consumer. You know, this is something that business schools work on. The other thing, I guess, is that the concern that I have about a model that people have been talking about is that it's based on a complaining model, or a consumer recognising, first of all, that they have a problem, and then the consumer having the desire, the cognitive ability, the willingness, the courage to complain. Most complaints are at the end of an entire process, and while I understand Abul went to the TIO website, most people wouldn't have a clue what the TIO is. I would question the issue of even this broad understanding of things like the ACCC. Most people wouldn't have a clue what those four letters stand for. I can guarantee most people, like I would say the majority of the population. It's hard to even, when I do research, I did some research looking at the ABC, a lot of people didn't even know what the ABC did. So I think we have to be careful about over-assuming that people can make complaints. And I think one of the things that comes up often when I deal now with consumer advocacy groups is that because you're in it, you expect that people know a lot about what's going on. I would actually say a person who complains is incredibly courageous. They've, to some degree, accepted that they've made a mistake, which is a huge issue in terms of their ego. And so I think somehow, and this is where I tell you your house is on fire, but I don't know how to put it out, somehow we have to actually have this model which is not based purely upon how people complain or when people come to us. The last thing I would say, and this is the issue that I would, as a consumer behaviour researcher, is not just evidence about what people are doing, but why people are doing it. Because if we know why people are making mistakes in the market, then we can anticipate mistakes. And again, there is a lot of evidence out there. If I do a research project, most of the time when I talk to these groups, straight away I can say, well, this is what marketers were doing 20 years ago, and here's a paper about it. So, and I think Robert is correct, is that a lot of the time it's about a literature review or looking at what evidence and then translating that evidence and saying where are the similarities. So I guess concluding what I'm saying is the issue is that marketers and consumer behaviour researchers know a lot about what and why these things are happening, and it's certainly my contribution as a consumer behaviour researcher is to explain back to people or even to regulators, here is the evidence. Now, ultimately, what we need to do is also collect, I guess, numbers, data, because that's the thing that seems to be coming through, is that that policy is based a lot of the time on systemic issues, on data. But I think there is already plenty of evidence out there. It's about translating it into a context that regulators can understand, for want of a better phrase.
I wonder, Paul, if that discipline would lead you to conclude that using those same tools might be predictive when looking at types of codes, types of rules, types of commercial behaviour that is one is trying to regulate or modify, and being able to predict with a certain degree of authority up front that these are going to either be more or less successful by the way they're framed.
I think so, and I think you can translate these broad ideas about human behaviour to any context, and that's one of the things that I find interesting, is that whenever I see something appear, I go, I can see how that's going to play out because we already know this about human behaviour. And certainly I've mentioned this to Jared once or twice as well, is that the stuff that scares me is when I look at these regulatory frameworks, because my knowledge is about human behaviour, not about the law. And I guess that's the thing, is bringing together what everybody's saying, I guess, is a range of disciplines, people who can have a dialogue and to recognise that there's more to it, I guess, than the law.
I wonder if that might be something that Abel wants to respond to, and I think Chris may have just escaped, Chris Chapman, but it seems to me he was talking about new approaches to ex-ante management of these things. It might well be that there's a circuit there that one can to go on and see if we can find more practical ways of constructing things that are more likely to work. And so perhaps if we come back to Abel after we hear from Sue Salthouse.
Okay, and thank you very much, Alan. And I'd like to pull us back perhaps a little to say that we are talking about small steps here, and we're not going to be able to wipe the slate clean and begin from nothing. But before I do that, I'd like to I've just been doing a little bit of data manipulating during the afternoon, and to say that we have 21 million Australians, and if I discount the under twos as not owning a mobile phone yet, I think that works out at about 11 cents per consumer that ACCAN has been blessed with. And so that I think that there was a reason that we were given $2 million, and that was because there's a damn good need for it. And I think that what we've talked about today is having a look at that need for how we move forward together. And I think the other thing is that, of course, when I say we can't begin with a clean slate, is that everything we've talked about today has been predicated on a competitive marketplace. And as a consumer advocate and a representative of the marginalised, if we're still allowed to use that term, I say that how are we going to operate in a competitive marketplace when there are 5 to 10% of people who are going to need special case interventions? So that then we cannot say that and I think, Robert, I'd like to take up on a point that you said, is that we cannot ignore the voice of the lone consumer and the vulnerable consumer. That whilst we're collecting this evidence, we need also to take notice of what is happening just out of our main view. Because it is those consumers, if we're going to bring everybody along together, that we need to be looking at. And so I have been really, really encouraged today when I listened to Delia and Chris and Peter saying, particularly Delia, putting forward that model of how they engage with consumers. Because we know that the processes of bringing things to attention in the CCC or the CCF has been a very regimented process. So I can understand how when Peter said that there was this huge problem out here which got into the papers from the Indigenous sector but wasn't raised at the CCF.